Hey, what's going on, my people, 86ers out there? I'm here with another video, basically discussing some boxing history that has come through via comments. So, interestingly enough, one of the comments where I had some interaction with the subscriber, which I appreciate, kind of centered on a video that I've done that features John L. Sullivan versus Tom Sharkey in a fantasy matchup, right? So essentially, as you go through the video, you'll see that ultimately ended up favoring John L. Sullivan in the end of that video if the two were to have fought in a fantasy type match or contest, whatnot. So the comment that I'm speaking of more so sided with Tom Sharkey getting the victory over John L. Sullivan, with the view that Tom Sharkey, of course, had a better resume than Sullivan. And then, of course, on Sullivan's resume, no one was as good as Tom Sharkey. So it got me thinking for sure. It did get me thinking. And I think he made a pretty solid point. I'm paraphrasing, of course, some of the things, but he made a pretty solid point in terms of why he felt that Tom Sharkey would get the victory. He thought that the endurance of Sharkey, of course, he had the pop to be able to hang with the best of them. And, of course, the Fighting Sailor is one of the toughest boxers we've seen at heavyweight, being 5'8", and weighing generally in or around 180, 185. If you look at his career average, I would say that's where it'll likely even out at, in that 180-something range in terms of at his peak and his peak prowess as well. So that offered some food for thought, and we know Tom Sharkey was in with a lot of top-level competition as well, given the time. He's not one of those guys with a massive resume just overall, but he does have some good names on there. Probably the two marquee names are certainly James J. Jeffries and Bob Fitzsimmons. And from all indications, he gave James J. Jeffries a pretty solid and heavy run during their time facing each other, which happened to be twice. And one of the things that I essentially mentioned in some other videos, or even in a video that I did on Tom Sharkey, because I do have one of those individual videos I did at one point, that is one of the earlier videos that I made, that we do have a little bit of footage of Tom Sharkey, a small sample, and that is a contest with him and James J. Jeffries. If I'm thinking correctly, I believe it was the second contest and the world heavyweight title was on the line. That's if I'm thinking correctly. And during this contest, there was an intent to have the entire thing filmed, but apparently the lights blew out in the arena or something of that nature, and that ended up making the video process impossible or something of that nature. But apparently there was someone there with a camera in a cigar box, interestingly enough, which is crazy, and they were able to capture a small sample size of footage. I think it's only about a minute, maybe even less than a minute, but essentially you see Tom Sharkey in there going at it with James J. Jeffries, and as I mentioned, he seems to be game charging forward. They get tied up a few times, but he's in there taking the blows, absorbing them, and dishing his own out. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that Sharkey, being smaller compared to Jeffries, and Jeffries being bigger than John L. Sullivan, would be able to give Sullivan a lot of problems. Now, as far as Sullivan's resume, and in reference to the comment, I do feel that there are some names that can hang with or right there with Sharkey by comparison, because the commenter felt that there really wasn't a name that was comparable. But I mentioned two guys, Charlie Mitchell, the British fighter, and I mentioned Jake Kilrain. These are two individuals from John L. Sullivan's resume. And of course, we know that Charlie Mitchell was the first to hand Sullivan a draw, even though the circumstances by which he went about it are certainly a bit iffy and shaky, I guess you can say. But he was able to do this. He stayed away from Sullivan, used his movement and range, and ultimately Sullivan was unable to capitalize with enough of the shots that he was dishing out to get Charlie Mitchell out of there. But in subsequent fights, of course, Sullivan handled Charlie Mitchell for sure. Now, Jake Kilrain, of course, was an American bare knuckle champion, or I guess you could say the world bare knuckle champion, after he fought Jim Smith in, I want to say, 1888 or something of that nature, somewhere around there. But Jim Smith, of course, was a top-level fighter who was a largely built dude who he had pop as well. Was a tough cookie. And Kilrain was able to defeat him, and that's what ultimately set up the contest between Kilrain and John L. Sullivan in 1889 when they fought in that bare knuckle, the last world championship fight for a bare knuckler. And Sullivan was able to win that fight, and he ended up dominating towards the tail end, I believe that's the case. And so I think that Kilrain, Charlie Mitchell, who was really about the size of a middleweight at points, but he ultimately was a heavyweight, or fought at heavyweight. That was his main division, and he was a solid overall boxer. Not a huge puncher, but he had good footwork, and he had a style that could trouble pretty much any boxer from that period because of his ability to move. Now, you can do your judgment in terms of how they mesh up with the likes of a Tom Sharkey, and ultimately, Sharkey was capable of being able to knock out either one of those guys. But I also think that Kilrain, Charlie Mitchell, Dominic McCaffrey, another guy that I mentioned from Sullivan's resume, who fought for the American Heavyweight Championship under the Marcus of Queensberry rules and lost to Sullivan. It was either a decision or a draw. One or two, but I think it was, I said lost, so I'm thinking he lost. But that being said, those are fighters who I think that could hang in there in any era, and, you know, it makes the thought of it interesting. So Sharkey, of course, he did cross the color line, so he has a plus in that regard, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, he goes in there and handles Sullivan, who, while he didn't, certainly had a number of fights under his resume that are not parallel by many. You had to go to some of the rarest in the sport to see parallels in terms of the estimated amount of fights Sullivan had, which are in the neighborhood of 400 to 500, depending on the sources or whatnot. But not all of these were long-distance fights, and not all of them were against top-level competition, but just a lot of experience in general. So it had me thinking. I wanted to share my thoughts on it. I think there's a path to victory for Tom Sharkey, of course. Could he knock out Sullivan? I don't know. Sullivan, at his best, at his peak, was certainly a force and not a guy who you could knock out, evident to his overall record, things of that nature, the amount of fights that he had. But that doesn't mean he can't be caught. And then from an endurance perspective, we know that Sullivan had that ability. A prime Sullivan, I still kind of lean towards him getting the victory over Tom Sharkey, who I think would be game and probably just a bit short as far as the victory is concerned. But he'll be in there, and I don't know that Sullivan knocks him out. He does have the ability to do so, though. But I can see it going the distance, and I'm still going to lean Sullivan. But Tom Sharkey is a fighter you can consider underrated, and I think that he is one who, when you really think about the era, he was a true standout as far as his abilities and what he was able to do at his size during a time where it was very competitive in the heavyweight division. So late 1800s there, then leading into the early 1900s. Can't remember if he fought in the early 1900s, but I want to say he did. He may have. But anyway, he was one of the top guys from his time period. So certainly food for thought there. But I just wanted to come on, share my opinion on it. Keep the comments coming. Certainly share your opinions in the comment. Hey, I'll be back again. 86 boxing, baby. Thank you.